They say the worst kind of betrayal never comes from your enemies. It comes from the people you would have taken a bullet for. I still remember the exact temperature of the room the night my world fell apart. It was raining heavily outside, the kind of aggressive, relentless rain that makes you feel like the sky itself is mourning. I was sitting at the kitchen table of the home we had built together over 7 long, grueling years. My husband, Julian, was late. Again. For the past 6 months, late had become his default setting. There was always a meeting, a crisis at the firm, a sudden business trip that couldn't wait. And like a fool, I believed every single word. I trusted him blindly because when you love someone for nearly a decade, you don't look for monsters in their eyes. You only see the person who promised to hold your hand until you were old and gray. But that night, the illusion didn't just crack. It shattered into a million jagged pieces. Julian had left his iPad on the kitchen counter, synced to his phone. It buzzed. Normally, I would never look. I respected his privacy. But it buzzed again, and again. And then, a message popped up on the lock screen that made my breath catch in my throat. The suite is booked for next weekend, darling. I can't wait to have you all to myself away from her. My hands started shaking so violently I almost dropped the device. I opened the message thread. It was from a woman named Victoria, a young, ambitious marketing executive who had recently joined Julian's architectural firm. As I scrolled through the messages, the room began to spin. Photos of them together, messages filled with deep affection, and worst of all, plans to systematically push me out of Julian's life. They weren't just having a fling. They were planning a future funded entirely by my hard work. You see, Julian wasn't always a successful architect. When I met him, he was a struggling student with nothing but a dream and a pile of debt. I was the one who worked 2 jobs to pay our rent. I was the one who sacrificed my own career ambitions to support his dream, using my savings to help him start his firm. I handled the finances, the legalities, and the back end of the business while he took the spotlight. And now, he was using that very success to buy luxury gifts, expensive dinners, and weekend getaways for another woman. The front door clicked open. The sound, which used to bring me immense joy, now filled me with a sickening sense of dread. Julian walked in, shaking the rain off his expensive designer coat, a coat I had bought him for his birthday. "Hey, babe," he said smoothly, not even looking at me as he tossed his keys onto the counter. "Sorry I'm late. The client meeting ran incredibly long."
I'm absolutely exhausted.
I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of guilt, any trace of remorse. There was none. He smiled his usual charming smile, completely unaware that his dark secret was laid bare right in front of me. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, fighting to keep the tears from spilling over. "Of course," he said, walking over to kiss my forehead. The touch made my skin crawl. "Just tired. I think I'm gonna head straight to bed." As he walked down the hallway, whistling a light tune, I sat frozen in the dim light of the kitchen. The grief was overwhelming, crushing my chest like a physical weight. But beneath that suffocating sadness, a tiny spark of something else began to ignite. Cold, hard realization settled over me. I had built this man from the ground up. I had given him his status, his wealth, and his confidence. And if he thought he could use my own creations to destroy me and walk away into the sunset with someone else, he was gravely mistaken. The tears stopped. I looked at the glowing screen of the iPad, copied every single message, financial statement, and photograph, and sent them to my private email. The naive, self-sacrificing wife died in that kitchen tonight. And in her place, someone else was born. For the next 2 weeks, I had to play the role of a lifetime. I had to wake up every morning, look the man who had broken my heart in the eyes, and smile. I had to cook his favorite meals, ask about his day, and pretend that everything was perfectly normal. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every time he smiled at his phone, every time he stepped into the other room to take a quick call, a knife twisted deeper into my back. But I knew that if I confronted him now, he would lie, manipulate, and use his legal connections to strip me of everything before I could even fight back. I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. I began looking into Victoria. She was younger, highly polished, and calculating. From what I discovered through mutual acquaintances and public records, she wasn't just interested in Julian. She was interested in his lifestyle. She loved the high-end restaurants, the VIP events, and the prestige of being with the principal owner of a rising architectural firm. What she didn't know, and what Julian had conveniently forgotten, was that legally the firm didn't just belong to him. When we first started the company, Julian was in the middle of a bankruptcy scare from a failed student venture. To protect the new business from his creditors, the firm was registered under a joint partnership where I held a 51% controlling stake. Over the years, as the business grew and became highly profitable, we never bothered to change that structure. Julian managed the creative direction, but on paper, I held the ultimate authority. One afternoon, while Julian was out scouting locations with Victoria, I went down to the firm's office under the guise of dropping off some paperwork. The staff all knew and respected me. To them, I was the quiet pillar behind Julian's success. I walked into his private office, my heart pounding against my ribs. I needed to check the company's financial ledgers. If Julian was spending money on Victoria, where was it coming from? What I found was far worse than simple corporate whining and dining. Julian had been transferring significant amounts of company capital into a private offshore account. He was actively draining the firm's reserves, money meant for employee salaries, supplier payments, and project developments. He was preparing to jump ship. His plan was clear. He was going to file for a sudden divorce, claim the business was struggling, force a low-value settlement on me, and then start a brand new firm with Victoria using the hidden funds. I sat in his leather chair, staring at the financial statements on the monitor. The sheer scale of his betrayal was staggering. He wasn't just leaving me for another woman. He was actively trying to ruin me financially, to ensure that I was left with nothing while he walked away with millions. Looking for something, Clara? I jumped, nearly dropping the mouse. Victoria was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a smug, knowing smile on her face. She held a travel mug of coffee, looking at me with an air of absolute superiority. I forced my expression into one of calm indifference. Just checking the quarterly tax projections, Victoria. As the majority shareholder, it's my responsibility. Victoria chuckled, a cold, mocking sound. She walked into the room, setting her coffee down on Julian's desk, right next to me. You know, Clara, times change. Businesses evolve. Sometimes people get left behind because they just don't fit into the grander design anymore. You should really focus on resting at home. Let the professionals handle the future. The disrespect was dizzying. She knew that I knew nothing, or so she thought. She believed she had already won. She looked at me as if I were a ghost, an inconvenient relic of Julian's past that was about to be swept away. The future is an unpredictable thing, Victoria, I said softly, standing up and gathering my things. You never really know what's coming around the corner. She smiled, a cruel, triumphant expression. Oh, I think we have a very clear picture of what's coming. I walked out of that office with a burning clarity. Any lingering doubts, any tiny voice in my head that whispered about forgiveness or marriage counseling, was permanently silenced. They wanted a war. They wanted to strip me of my dignity and my hard work. They had no idea that they had just handed me the keys to their own destruction. The first step of my plan required absolute discretion. I couldn't go to a standard family lawyer. I needed someone who specialized in forensic accounting and corporate law. I contacted Marcus Vance, a high-profile attorney known for his ruthless efficiency in high-stakes corporate disputes. When Marcus reviewed the files, the messages, and the financial transfers I had uncovered, a slow, grim smile spread across his face. Your husband has been very clever, Mrs. Thorne, Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair. But he made one fatal mistake. He assumed you would never look. Because you own 51% of the company, his unauthorized transfer of corporate funds into a personal offshore account constitutes major financial misconduct and a breach of fiduciary duty. He hasn't just wronged you personally. He has broken the law. What are my options? I asked, my voice steady. We could file for divorce immediately and freeze the assets, Marcus explained. But if we do that now, he will hire a team to delay the process, tie you up in court for years, and potentially hide the remaining funds where we can't touch them. Or, we can let him think he's succeeding. We let him commit fully to his plan. When he officially signs the contract for his next massive commercial project, the landmark deal he's been chasing for months, we strike. At that moment, his liability will be at an all-time high. The landmark project Marcus was referring to was the Meridian Luxury Towers. It was a multi-million-dollar development contract that would put Julian's firm on the international map. Julian and Victoria had been working day and night to secure it. If they won this bid, the firm's valuation would triple. Julian was planning to use the first massive payout from this contract to finalize his exit strategy from our marriage. "We wait," I said firmly. "Let him win the bid." Over the next month, I became an invisible shadow in my own life. I watched Julian and Victoria celebrate early victories. I listened to them talk on the phone in hushed tones, planning their new life in a penthouse downtown. I even found a brochure for a luxury engagement ring hidden in Julian's briefcase. He hadn't even filed for divorce yet, and he was already shopping for her ring with money that belonged to our joint accounts. Every evening, Julian would come home and put on a show of affection. "I'm doing all this for us, Clara," he would say, pretending to be exhausted from building our future. "Once this Meridian deal closes, we can finally relax. We can take that trip to Europe you always wanted." The sheer hypocrisy of his words was breathtaking. The trip to Europe was actually a holiday he had already booked for himself and Victoria, using the company credit card under the guise of a client consultation. Instead of getting angry, I channeled my emotion into meticulous preparation. I worked with Marcus late into the night while Julian thought I was asleep. We gathered every invoice, every fraudulent expense report, and every single email communication between Julian and Victoria where they discussed using company assets for personal gain. I also reached out quietly to the primary investors of the firm, people who had invested in Julian because of my initial pitch and my financial management. I requested private meetings with them, presenting them with undeniable proof that Julian was compromising the firm's financial stability to fund his private lifestyle and prepare for a messy corporate split. One by one, the investors realized that their money was at serious risk under Julian's sole leadership. They were furious, but I asked them to remain completely silent. "Do not confront him," I told them. "Let him present the final pitch to the Meridian Group. Let him secure the deal. Then we execute the change." The trap was set. Julian and Victoria were moving forward at full speed, completely blind to the cliff they were about to drive over. They thought they were playing a game against a weak, clueless housewife. They didn't realize they were playing against the chief strategist who had built the chessboard they were standing on. It was a parting speech, and I knew it. He was trying to ease his own conscience before delivering the devastating blow he had planned for the next day. I knew from my legal team that Julian had already drafted the divorce papers. His lawyer was instructed to serve them to me at exactly 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, 1 hour after the Meridian contract was safely signed. The evening before the final contract signing for the Meridian project, Julian was on top of the world. He came home wearing a sharp, custom-tailored suit, carrying a bottle of vintage champagne. "Tonight is a night for celebration, Clara," he declared, pouring 2 glasses. "The Meridian board just called. The presentation was a flawless success. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we sign the official contracts. The firm is entering the big leagues." I took the glass from his hand, looking into his bright, arrogant eyes. "You must be very proud of yourself, Julian. You've worked so hard to get exactly what you wanted." "We worked hard," he corrected smoothly, though there was a hollow ring to his words. "I couldn't have done it without your support in the early days, Clara. I really mean that." He wanted to ensure the deal was locked in under his name before he cast me aside like a piece of trash. "To the future," I said, raising my glass. "To the future," Julian echoed, clinking his glass against mine. He drank deeply, a triumphant smile on his face. That night, after Julian fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, I stood by the window looking out at the city lights. My mind raced through everything we had been through. I remembered the days when we had nothing but a small studio apartment and a dream. I remembered skipping meals so he could afford the high-end design software he needed. I had loved this man with every fiber of my being. A single tear escaped my eye, sliding down my cheek. It was the last tear I would ever shed for Julian Thorne. I walked into the living room, picked up my phone, and dialed Marcus Vance. "Everything is in place," I said coldly. "Authorize the filings. Inform the board and the investors. Tomorrow morning we bring the curtain down." "Are you ready for this, Clara?" Marcus asked, his tone serious. "There is no turning back after tomorrow." "I've been ready for a long time, Marcus. Let's finish it." I went back to bed and slept soundly for the first time in months. The storm was coming, and for once, I wasn't the one who needed to run for cover. 5. The grand unraveling. The grand conference room of the Meridian Development Group was spectacular. Located on the 50th floor of a towering glass skyscraper, it offered a panoramic view of the entire city. A massive mahogany table sat in the center, surrounded by top executives, legal representatives, and the primary investors of Julian's firm. Julian arrived early, accompanied by Victoria. She was dressed in an immaculate white designer dress, looking every bit like the new queen of the empire she believed she was inheriting. They were laughing quietly, sharing an intimate, exclusionary energy that sickened anyone who knew the truth. At exactly 9:45 a.m., I walked through the double-glass doors of the conference room. The laughter instantly died on Julian's lips. He stared at me, his eyes widening in complete shock. Victoria froze, her cup of coffee stopping halfway to her mouth. "Clara?" Julian stammered, quickly standing up and smoothing his jacket. What are you doing here? This is a private, high-level corporate closing. You shouldn't be here." Victoria stepped forward, her polite mask slipping for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of pure malice. "Clara, this is incredibly inappropriate. Please leave before you embarrass yourself and Julian in front of the clients." I didn't answer them. Instead, I walked calmly to the head of the mahogany table, took a seat in the primary chair, and placed my leather briefcase on the surface. Marcus Vance walked in right behind me, taking his place at my side. The CEO of the Meridian Group, Mr. Sterling, looked around the room, confused. "Julian, I thought you said you were the sole decision-maker for your firm. Who is this lady?" Before Julian could speak, I looked directly at Mr. Sterling. "My name is Clara Thorne. I am the co-founder and the 51% majority shareholder of Thorne Architectural Design. And as the controlling partner, I am here to inform you that the contract you are about to sign with my husband is legally invalid." The room erupted into a low murmur of shock. Julian's face went completely pale, the color draining from his skin until he looked like a ghost. "Clara, stop this madness right now," he hissed, rushing over to my side of the table. "You don't know what you're doing. You're destroying everything I've built." "No, Julian," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the silent room. "I am protecting what I built, and I am exposing what you have stolen." Marcus Vance stepped forward, opening his briefcase and distributing thick legal dossiers to Mr. Sterling, the Meridian executives, and our firm's primary investors. "What is the meaning of this?" Victoria demanded, her voice cracking with rising panic. "This is a circus. Julian, do something." "Please turn to page 4 of the document," Marcus announced calmly, ignoring her entirely. "As you will see, over the last 6 months, Mr. Julian Thorne has illegally misappropriated over $1.2 million of corporate funds, transferring them into an unlisted offshore account in the Cayman Islands. These funds were directly drawn from active project capital, severely compromising the financial liquidity and operational safety of the firm." Mr. Sterling's expression darkened instantly as he skimmed through the certified bank records and forensic audits. He looked up at Julian, his eyes cold as ice. "Is this true, Julian?" "It's a misunderstanding, a smear campaign." Julian panicked, his voice reaching a desperate pitch. "My wife is emotionally unstable. We are going through personal issues. We are also providing the court filings for a formal board emergency resolution. I interrupted, looking directly at our firm's investors who were sitting across the table. They nodded at me in grim solidarity. As of 8 o'clock this morning, by a unanimous vote of the majority shareholders and investors, Julian Thorne has been officially stripped of his title as CEO and principal architect of Thorne Design. He has been terminated from the company for gross financial misconduct and breach of contract. The words hit Julian like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, catching himself on the edge of the table. The absolute power, the control, the arrogance he had carried for years vanished in an instant. You can't do this to me," he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. "The Meridian Project is my design. It's my vision. And it will be executed beautifully," I replied calmly, "by the incredibly talented team of junior architects whom you haven't paid in 3 weeks because you were busy buying luxury weekend getaways. The firm will fulfill the contract, Mr. Sterling. But Julian Thorne will have absolutely nothing to do with it." Victoria looked at Julian, then at the financial documents, and finally at me. The realization of what had just happened washed over her face. The wealthy, powerful mogul she had tied her future to was suddenly a disgraced, unemployed man facing massive legal and financial ruin. "Julian," she whispered, her voice filled with a sudden, sharp disgust. "What did you do? You told me you owned the whole company." Julian didn't even look at her. He was staring at me, his eyes pleading, desperate, and entirely broken. "Mr. Sterling closed his folder with a heavy, decisive thud. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and looked at Julian with complete disdain. "The Meridian Group does not do business with individuals who lack basic integrity, Mr. Thorne," Sterling said coldly. "Mrs. Thorne, we are highly impressed by your swift management of this corporate crisis. Our legal team will review the restructured corporate entity under your sole leadership. If everything aligns, we look forward to signing the contract with your company tomorrow morning." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I said, rising to shake his hand. "I assure you, the project is in safer hands than ever before." The Meridian executives filed out of the room, leaving only myself, Marcus, Julian, Victoria, and our investors. The investors stood up next, walking past Julian without giving him so much as a glance. They shook my hand, expressing their relief that the company had been saved from Julian's reckless greed, and departed. The grand conference room, once a stage for Julian's ultimate triumph, had become his courtroom. Victoria grabbed her designer handbag from the table, her face twisted in anger and embarrassment. She looked at Julian as if he were an infectious disease. "Don't call me Julian. Don't come near my office. We are completely through." "Victoria, wait," Julian pleaded, reaching out for her arm. "We can fix this. I still have the offshore account. We can start over." "The offshore account has been officially frozen by a court order as of 9 o'clock this morning, Mr. Thorne." Marcus Vance cut in with a calm, devastating smile. "Those funds are currently being returned to the company treasury to cover the losses you caused. You currently have access to exactly $0. Victoria didn't even wait to hear the rest. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, her high heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor until the doors slammed shut behind her. She had come for the money and the status. The moment both disappeared, she did too. Julian collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The silence in the room was deafening. The mighty architect, the man who thought he could discard a human life like a piece of scrap paper, was completely undone. After a long moment, he lifted his head. His eyes were red, filled with tears of self-pity. "Clara, please," he choked out, his voice cracking. "How could you do this to me? I made a mistake, yes. I was foolish. But 7 years. We built a life together. You're going to destroy me completely over a lapse in judgment?" I walked over to him, standing right in front of his chair. I looked down at him, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel grief. I only felt a profound sense of detachment. "A lapse in judgment, Julian?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "You spent 6 months systematically planning to leave me broke, homeless, and broken-hearted. You used the money we earned together to buy gifts for another woman while planning to throw me out of the company I built for you. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. I have nothing left, he whispered, staring blankly at the floor. Nothing. You have exactly what you brought into this marriage, Julian, I said, picking up my briefcase. Nothing. Marcus Vance stepped forward, pulling a document from his coat pocket and placing it gently on the table in front of Julian. What is this? Julian asked hoarsely. Those are your own divorce papers, Julian, I said, walking toward the exit. The ones you planned to serve me at 11 o'clock. I just had my legal team make a few minor adjustments to the asset distribution. Sign them, because if you don't, Marcus will ensure that your next public appearance is in front of a criminal judge for corporate embezzlement. I didn't wait for his answer. I turned my back on him and walked out into the bright, sunlit hallway. As the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside and looked at my reflection in the polished mirror. The sadness was gone. The betrayal had left a scar. Yes, but that scar was a reminder of my own strength. I had survived the worst thing the person I loved could do to me, and I had come out stronger, wealthier, and entirely independent. 6 months later, the world looked entirely different. Thorne Architectural Design, now renamed Clara Thorne and Associates, celebrated the grand opening of the Meridian Luxury Towers. The project was a resounding success, praised globally for its innovative design and impeccable corporate management. The firm's value had soared, and I was officially recognized as one of the top female executives in the industry. I had taken the broken pieces of my life and built a fortress. As for Julian, the swift hand of karma had not been kind. Without his wealth, his status, or his company, his true colors were visible to everyone. The architectural community is a small, highly connected circle. Word of his financial misconduct and betrayal spread like wildfire. No reputable firm would hire him. No client would trust him with their money. The last I heard, Julian was working a low-level consulting job for a minor construction firm in a small town 3 hours away. He lived in a cramped, rented apartment, a stark contrast to the luxury penthouse he had envisioned sharing with Victoria. Victoria herself had moved on to another city. Her reputation at the firm, completely tarnished after her involvement in the corporate scandal, was leaked to the industry boards. She had tried to sue Julian for misrepresentation, but you cannot extract blood from a stone. They both ended up with exactly what they deserved: each other's resentment. One evening, after the closing gala for the Meridian project, I stood on the balcony of the top-floor suite, looking out over the city. The air was crisp, and the lights below twinkled like a sea of diamonds. A young reporter from a business magazine walked up to me, holding a small voice recorder. "Mrs. Thorne, your story is truly incredible. You took a company through a massive internal crisis and turned it into an empire. What is the biggest lesson you learned throughout this journey?" I looked out at the vast skyline, thinking back to that rainy night in the kitchen, to the pain that felt like it would kill me, and to the cold determination that saved my life. "I learned that trust is a beautiful thing," I said softly, a gentle smile appearing on my face. "But self-worth is non-negotiable. Never allow your love for someone else to make you blind to your own value. And most importantly, never forget that the universe has a very precise way of balancing the scales." The reporter smiled, nodding as she wrote down my words. "So, you believe in karma?" "I don't just believe in it," I replied, raising my glass of champagne to the night sky. "I watched it work. The true measure of a person is not how they behave when they are winning. It's how they treat the people who help them get there." Julian thought he could build his happiness on the foundation of my ruin. He forgot that a house built on betrayal has no foundation at all. It will always crumble, and when it does, it buries the person who built it. I turned back toward the brightly lit ballroom, where my team, my friends, and my true allies were waiting to celebrate. The past was a closed book, a distant shadow. The future was entirely mine, and it was brighter than it had ever been.